Once he ruled over Egypt with an iron fist. Today, Hosni Mubarak appeared in court. He was wheeled in on a hospital trolley. He's charged with corruption and ordering the shooting of protesters.
All these accusations, I deny them all.
In Cairo, in the country and around the region, they watched the first major trial of the Arab uprising.
When I saw him today, I felt it's the very first step to a long way to justice.
We'll be asking how this unprecedented trial of an Arab leader is seen in the Middle East. Also tonight, the hacking scandal spreads. Heather Mills says a Mirror Group journalist admitted that messages from Sir Paul McCartney were intercepted. A summer holiday ruined. Tens of thousands face uncertainty after Holidays for You goes into administration. And a warning about Britain's defence capability. MPs say cutbacks threaten its role in the future.
On BBC London, learn lessons from Chicago, the message from 5 boroughs opposed to London's super sewer, and a warning from the government to the capital's workforce to avoid using transport during the Olympics.
Good evening. Hosni Mubarak, the man who once ruled supreme over the Arab world's most populous nation, was wheeled into a Cairo courtroom today on a hospital trolley. He denied charges of corruption and ordering the killing of protesters in February. The televised session was watched by millions in Egypt and around the region, the most potent symbol to date of the changes unleashed by the Arab uprising. More on the regional impact in a moment, but first our World Affairs editor John Simpson, who was in court for the unprecedented trial.
It was to be a day of reckoning. Soon after dawn, as the preparations were completed and the demonstrators gathered, ex-President Mubarak was brought from his hospital at Sharm el-Sheikh to the Cairo Police Academy that used to be named after him. The Egyptian press was full of stories that he was too ill to be brought into court, that he'd be kept in the Academy's hospital wing instead. There was intense excitement in the courtroom as the lawyers, police and journalists waited. And then, through the heavy steel bars of the dock, we caught the first glimpse of him and realized he was being wheeled in a bed. His sons, who are also in the dock here, stooped to kiss him. At the sight of the ex-president, there was an instant of utter silence. Then, from right round the court, an audible intake of breath. The man who had controlled everyone's lives in Egypt for so long had finally been brought to book. The charges against him were read out: financial corruption and ordering the killing of demonstrators, which carries the death penalty.
All these accusations, I deny them all.
Mr. Mubarak's lawyers wanted him to go back to hospital. The judge, Ahmed Rifat, who has a reputation for being independent-minded, said he had to stay in court. Emotions rose high. The prosecutor claimed Mr. Mubarak had wanted the largest possible number of demonstrators to be shot down. Some of the defense lawyers wanted the present Egyptian leader, Field Marshal Tantawi, to be called as a witness, bringing the new power structure into the case. This is going to be a difficult trial to control. Outside the court, too, the passions were running high. Mr. Mubarak still has supporters here. There'll be quite a lot of people here who are absolutely delighted, overjoyed, feel it's their revenge on their former leader and for everything he did. But at the same time, I'm sure also the spectacle of an 83-year-old man going through this process also create a certain amount of sympathy as well. But the fiercest anger came from the relatives and friends of people who'd been killed and injured in the revolution. When the trouble started today, The police in their clean white uniforms just ran for it. 6 months ago, at the height of the revolution, it was the police who were shooting down the demonstrators in the streets. Around 850 people died in all. One of them lived here, in a poor area of Cairo, an 18-year-old called Nasser Faisal. The flat is full of photos of him, and you can see he was gentle and a bit unworldly. But he got caught up in a demo, and the police shot and killed him. Today, naturally, Nasser's family were glued to the television, watching their former president being tried for ordering the killings of people like Nasser.
I'm very happy, but I have still got this fire burning in me. I want to see Mubarak get what he deserves. He killed the best people of Egypt just so his son could take over from him.
It's been a momentous day here. In other parts of the Middle East, presidents are still ordering their forces to shoot down demonstrators. But they won't be able to just ignore what's happened here today. John Simpson, BBC News, Cairo.
Well, as John was saying, Hosni Mubarak's trial is being watched by leaders and public alike throughout the Middle East. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins has been looking at Mr. Mubarak's transition from president to prisoner and what that fall from grace could mean for the region. James.
No wonder Hosni Mubarak's fall has transfixed the Middle East. A leader courted and supported by American presidents, credited with bolstering Middle East peace and countering extremism, now brought low by his own people's rage against the brutality and corruption of his regime. Hosni Mubarak was thrust into Egypt's presidency in October 1981 when Anwar Sadat was assassinated beside him. Stability became the obsession at the expense of all political opposition. President Mubarak pleased Washington by sticking with his predecessor's peace treaty with Israel, although it was very unpopular in Egypt. He put thousands of Islamic radicals behind bars, many without trial, and many were tortured. To the White House, he usually seemed an indispensable ally, a beacon of stability well worth supporting with billions of dollars in aid. But in Egypt itself, his whole regime became associated with corruption and brutality. And after 30 years in power, it took only 18 days of immense popular anger with Tahrir Square at its heart to bring President Mubarak down and set him on the road to trial. And today, Hosni Mubarak's ignominious court appearance gripped audiences across the region. This is Jordan. So could other leaders face a similar fate? And is it right to treat a former president like this?
We support his being put on trial because he harmed Egyptian people. He committed murder and crimes. What he did is shameful.
This trial has come at a time when his health should mean that a man of 80 years old doesn't have to face justice. He spent his life serving Egypt.
Arab satellite channels ran blanket coverage across the region, but in some countries, notably Syria, Libya and Yemen, state TV did not show this sort of live coverage. The scenes in the dock are the stuff of nightmares for Colonel Gaddafi or President Assad. But it's Egypt which is most likely to be changed by this trial.
We've only just started this trial yet, and I don't think one can be sure yet whether it will appear to be fair and straightforward. But let's assume that it does appear to be fair and straightforward. Then I think it will help the process of building a new national feeling, consciousness in Egypt.
So, Egypt's ex-president has been confirmed as the big political casualty of the Arab Spring so far. But that does not mean that other leaders in the region still relying on force will inevitably suffer Hosni Mubarak's fate. George.
James, thank you. Well, our World Affairs editor John Simpson joins me now from Cairo. John, it must have been extraordinary to be there in court as this man was brought so low.
It was, George. It was a most remarkable thing. The excitement, the sort of pent-up feelings of just about everybody there. I mean, it's quite interesting. Even people like senior police officers were clearly excited at the prospect of seeing their former leader and at hearing his voice. And you couldn't help feeling that it was that sense that this was a man who had ruled over them pretty fiercely for 30 years, and they actually did really want to see him brought low. So the excitement in the court was something I don't think I'll ever forget. I've seen Saddam Hussein's trial in Iraq 5 years ago, but wasn't like this at all. I mean, I think the difference was that Saddam Hussein was brought down effectively by Western powers invading his country, whereas here Mr. Mubarak was brought down by his own people after only 18 days of demonstrations.
John, that drama aside, how important is this for the Arab uprising as a whole?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the Arab uprising is starting to fade in lots of places. I mean, everywhere just about except Libya, the powers in control are still very much in control. But I can't help thinking, I mean, obviously Syria is the country that would be most affected by this, and I'm absolutely certain that the Assad regime there must be looking at this with great nervousness, because after all, if it's possible for the demonstrators to just pull out the stops a little bit more and for the army to be less effective in shooting them down, then Mr. Mubarak's fate could be President Assad's fate too.
John, thank you. Well, as the drama unfolded in Egypt, the violent crackdown on protesters in Syria has prompted condemnation from the UN Security Council tonight. Human rights activists say tanks and troops have moved into the centre of Hama, scene of the worst clashes in months of unrest. Foreign journalists are not allowed into Syria, so our correspondent Jim Muir has sent this report from neighbouring Lebanon.
There was shelling, machine gun fire and panic as the tanks moved in. Activist videos on the internet said there were even gunmen on rooftops to keep people off the streets. The tanks seemed to meet little resistance as they ground into the city centre. Residents said the attack was unprovoked.
Today at the morning, about 5 a.m., all ways of communication, landlines, cell phones, internet have been dropped completely. And we start to listen big fire shots and bomb and tanks missiles in all directions of the city.
The action seems to have put the government back in control of Hama. Its 700,000 or so people seem to be more or less solidly behind the uprising. Even before the final assault, Hama was already burying its dead. Nobody knows how many died today, but last time a revolt was crushed there, in 1982, it was many thousands. Jim Muir, BBC News, Beirut.
The famine, which has gripped parts of southern Somalia, has spread to 3 new areas of the country. According to the United Nations, the entire south is likely to be declared a famine zone within the next 6 weeks. Much of that area is controlled by Islamist militants who banned food aid in the region. The Italian Prime Minister has been addressing Parliament on the country's debt crisis amid calls from opposition parties for him to step down. Silvio Berlusconi said Italy had a solid economic foundation and its banks had good reserves. More phone hacking allegations have emerged, this time about the Mirror Group. Heather Mills has claimed in a BBC interview that a senior Mirror Group journalist admitted hacking a highly sensitive voicemail left for her by Sir Paul McCartney before they were married. Our Home Affairs correspondent Matt Prodger reports.
Heather Mills, best known for her 4-year marriage to Sir Paul McCartney. The subject of tabloid stories for many years, she once said they'd almost driven her to suicide. Tonight she alleges that 10 years ago a senior journalist at Mirror Group newspapers admitted hacking a voicemail left for her by Sir Paul following an argument. She said the journalist quoted parts of the message word for word.
He said, "Oh, I heard you've had a big argument with your boyfriend." I said, "You've obviously hacked my phone, and if you do anything with this story," because they were obviously very private conversations about issues we were having as a couple, and I said, "Then I'll go to the police." And He said, okay, yeah, we did hear it on your voice messages. I won't